101 Radio. Book 101 is about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is an author, podcast host of Emotionally Unavailable, and licensed clinician. Oh, well, she will tell us about this. What is LCSW all about? And no other than Miss Malisa Hepner.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Malisa. And can you please introduce more about yourself and what is this LCSW mean?
So LCSW means that I am a licensed clinical social worker. So I'm a therapist in Oklahoma. You don't have to be a therapist like with that license, but that's what I've chosen to do with it.
Hmm. Congratulations
Thank
for
you.
sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about the school, the cried bully. Can you tell us about this book of yours?
Yeah. So at the time, I was working in a school as a school counselor, and I actually was in this really profoundly dark place in my personal life. And one of the things that I did to kind of move away from the darkness was work on projects like this book. And this was the first one. And it actually kind of just stumbled in my lap in that I knew somebody who was kind of interested in doing something like this. And I did it kind of just to show them like it's possible to use AI to create your illustrations. So what I did is I took a lesson that I had created for a school wide bullying lesson and just like learned every ounce of the self-publishing steps and did all of it myself. It's perfect for educators. I don't know if it really lands with parents because they don't necessarily understand the dynamic in schools. But the reason I wrote that first book is because um, we were seeing so much overuse of the word bully, and it felt really important to me that the kids knew what bullying was and what it wasn't, because bullying needs to be taken seriously. Other types of conflict need to be labeled appropriately and dealt with differently than what is truly bullying. And so much of what I would see these kids say is like literally they express an opinion, someone else, the most benign opinions, someone else disagrees. He's bullying me. I mean, I was hearing it every day. It really lands with educators because they kind of know that whole scenario, because it really is one of the biggest problems within interpersonal conflict in the schools is labeling bullying incorrectly. But yeah, so that's I just figured out the whole self-publishing process and went to work on it, and it was great because it could get me in a flow state and distract me, and I found access to creativity that I just didn't even know I had. But honestly, like if I'm being 100% transparent, I was like, well, since this had initially been written as a lesson very tailored to my school, like at first I used real teachers' names and stuff. Anybody that gave me permission teacher wise, we left those names in once I converted to a book, but I had to take all the kids' names out. So what I did was I used my daughter and all of her friends' names. And then I just created a little series so that I wanted to make certain the one after that, which was like the school that learned kindness, um, was a little more, could be at school, could be read at home, wherever. Like I knew parents weren't going to love the bully book just because they didn't understand the dynamic. But yeah, so it was, I did a little series where I literally just felt so called to do it and did it until I didn't feel like a real desire to do it anymore.
Miss Malisa, how do you define true bullying versus routine conflict or unpleasant behavior?
Well, I mean, for me, it was, you have to look at power differentials. So, is that present in this scenario? Is there an intent there? And that's, I think, where the biggest line can be drawn is what the person who's being labeled as a bully, like, what was their intent? And not just like from their word of mouth, like as an adult in this scenario, looking at it and going, they weren't like stalking you around the school. They weren't throwing things at you. They weren't really name calling. Because one of the biggest things that we would see in bullying too is, especially with girls, girls who are rule followers, oftentimes felt bullied because they would get involved when maybe it wasn't a scenario where they should have gotten involved. So, like, um, they would just overhear a conversation between two other girls and say whatever their piece to the conversation was, and they weren't really invited in the conversation, so now these girls respond rude. This girl's calling that bullying. I would agree if the behavior continued following the conversation, but I think within the context of the conversation, you I'm going to say this in a not nice way, but they put their nose where it didn't belong, and then these people responded. If it's over at that point, that's not bullying, that's a response, that's a conflict. But I mean, bullying truly is trying to create an atmosphere of fear. Like I said, the power differential, it's intent. Whereas conflict is conflict. Like, we're gonna not get along with everybody all day, every day. And when I say children in school systems will call any and everything bullying, they really will.
Definitely. Very well said, Miss Malaysia. Very well said. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to our world. Why is mislabeling minor incidents as bullying damaging to student and school culture?
For one, I think when we take focus off of what real bullying is, then you're not seeing when things do need to be addressed. If we allow a culture where anything gets to be called bullying, to me, it's like the boy who cried wolf. So we can't address actual bullying if everyone from any stakeholder, from superintendent down to the pre-K students, if everyone isn't using common language and having the same understanding of what the definition of bullying is, then we don't catch the incidences of bullying. We learn to overlook anything because when you take too many things to the powers that be, too many inappropriate things, they no longer care when it comes to dealing with the things that actually matter. There are a lot of incidences of true bullying in schools and in workplaces, but we're not addressing those because there's still this overuse of the word. I feel like that's the number one harm that comes with the overuse of the word bullying. I know other people feel it's not necessarily fair in the case of children to take on a label like bully if that's not what's being done. And if I were to really think about it, I would say I agree with that too. But mostly, I think the harm is you don't take care of the actual incidences of bullying if you don't have a really good definition of what bullying is.
Definitely. And Miss Melissa, let's talk about the root causes and systemic issues. How have rigid anti-bullying policies contributed to this problem?
Well, if I'm being really honest, I think the policies are created by people who haven't necessarily worked in a school. And I think that's a lot of the problems in education in general is that policies are being created by people who have never been an educator. And as somebody who was only in education for 7 years and made my way to education by way of emergency certification in Oklahoma, um, I personally wouldn't I couldn't stay longer than 7 years because the system from the top down is broken, and I reached burnout from not being able to function in a broken system. So I think that's the number one problem, is that the people writing the policies don't understand. I feel like one of the ways I was successful in education is that I really approached things from a parental perspective. The reason I wanted to be a teacher is because I wanted to be the type of teacher that my children, or one child, didn't have. And then that didn't last long, so I moved over to school counseling. But so many things happen in an hour time span that you just couldn't possibly fathom if you didn't do it yourself. And I never really crossed the barrier into thinking of things from the perspective of the educator. It really was a very parental perspective, and I loved that because it really gave me a chance to connect with parents, for them to understand the truth of what was happening, the truth about their child's behavior, the truth about the classroom environment, the truth about the restrictions that are in place for educators, for students that are not necessarily helping anybody. And I think that the people who make these policies obviously are well intended. Nobody makes an anti-bullying policy because they want children to be harmed. But where the harm happens is, no, like, what do they call those, zero tolerance policies. I don't know that there's a lot of room for those unless you have a clearly defined way of saying this is bullying, this is not bullying. There are incidences where it's very easy to see, yeah, this is bullying, and what do we do? The other side of that coin is that when we create a zero tolerance policy, there is no room for nuance in that. And if you have a child who is all of the sudden behaving differently, how can we offer supports to this child? If it's not a scenario where they've, from pre-K to whatever grade, have been creating havoc in their classrooms or on the playground, what's going on with this kid? What's the need that needs to be addressed? And so I feel like a lot of the policies, they allow for too much nuance in some ways and zero nuance in others. That was a very long-winded answer, so I hope I answered it.
Indeed. Indeed, Miss Melissa. Beautifully, beautifully articulated. Does fear of liability drive schools to over document incidents as bullying to cover themselves?
In my experience, I can't say this for all districts. In my district, I would say the exact opposite is true, because there wasn't really a fear for the way these policies are presented to the public and the way they are enacted within the school systems are very different. And so the school system's not really afraid of liability, because truly the times that I saw where action really should have been taken, it wasn't. So again, I don't know that there is a true definition of bullying that is written in these policies at the district level for them to follow. It's always up to the discretion of whichever administrator is looking at it. And I've met some real Pollyanna administrators who believe whatever's being said to them, and don't necessarily take the word of the teacher involved, whatever input they want to give about the scenario. I've also seen administrators who were racist and ageist, all kinds of stuff. And so, when you leave an ambiguous policy in place and they get the right to make the decision, I feel like that's where the harm is that at the district level, so at the state level, the superintendent will post a policy just to make people happy. And then what they do is they funnel those to the district level, and they're up to the administrator's interpretation of whatever this statute was. And it's just very irritating.
Miss Melissa, how does overusing the term undermine support for students experiencing severe targeted bullying?
I think that we have desensitized adults to the word itself, and so when an educator is faced with making a decision about whether or not something is bullying, I think that they've allowed so much to not be considered bullying that really could be in the category of bullying, and so much that really shouldn't be has also been allowed. And again, I just think it's ambiguity. And anytime something's ambiguous, how can we enact it appropriately? And ultimately what we want, in terms of why I wrote this book especially, is children to be very empowered about what they do and don't have to put up with. And so I want kids to understand where the line is and what to do once the line is crossed. And I mean, like, the book is silly, but a lot of it is like, if someone does this, is it bullying? No, but it's also not nice. And so, just reminding kids to treat each other with kindness, I feel like goes such a long way versus just educators who are already burnt out. And that's the other problem, is that it does create a lot of paperwork if you open a bullying investigation, and educators don't make very much money and they're way overworked. The only way to succeed in education is to volunteer to do a bunch of stuff for free. That's like, people like really want the teacher of the year award, and the only way to get that is to to violate your own boundaries in a lot of way. So why I'm saying that is, you're getting children approaching you all day every day, and that is not an exaggeration, saying that they are being bullied. These educators who are burnt out in both their personal and professional lives are so desensitized to the word bullying, they literally aren't giving children a chance to voice their concerns. I think there probably are a lot of actual cases of bullying that aren't being addressed because educators are tired of like hearing the word bully, and that's not fair either. Again, I think we can't have so much ambiguity, and I think we have to have working definitions written within a student code of conduct. But also, when children are empowered, then they can make good decisions for themselves too.
Definitely. And Miss Melissa, as an author, podcast host, and emotionally unavailable, as well as LCSW, what are your short term and long term goals?
Well, I'm really putting a lot of focus into my podcast. I love my podcast. It's called Emotionally Unavailable because I feel like that's the default human condition. I found myself to be very emotionally unavailable. And as I started to unravel and unpack all of that within myself, I started to notice, like, oh, we kind of all do this. I feel like our default state is to intellectualize and minimalize and trivialize our experience. And so yeah, it kind of centers around my journey to being more emotionally available, but by connecting with other people who have done the same, and we're kind of sharing our light with others. Also trying to build up my public speaker profile a little bit more, wanting to put a lot of focus in that. So I've been doing a lot more conferences and things like that. Those two are probably where most of my focus is going to be for a little while.
Good luck to your goals, Miss
Thank you.
Melissa, and looking forward for more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people out there want to be, of course, like you?
Um, wow. I would say be yourself and figure out who that self is. But mostly like realize that you're perfectly fine exactly how you are. I used to think that we had to spend all this time and energy into fixing every last thing about ourselves. One day I'll be this, or when I'm this. And I just realized, like, I was already a really good person. I didn't need to become so much of anything. I just needed to unbecome a lot of a few things. And that's what I've been doing. And I would just offer to anyone, that if you're struggling, there is hope and there is help out there. And life gets better when we start to just fully embrace who we are and understand that hating ourselves or striving for perfection is not accountability. It's just the self hatred that we were taught. And I like to say, just because we were taught self hatred doesn't mean we have to practice it. So love yourself and each other.
Love yourself indeed. And thank you so much for your advice, Miss
Yeah.
Melissa. And can you please recommend a book that influenced your journey?
Yes. Could not recommend this book higher. The book that saved my life is a book called The Finding Peace Workbook by Troy Love. He is also an LCSW in Arizona. And the reason it was so profound for me is because I was kind of driving myself crazy by all of the noise in my head. And what I learned from this book is he breaks shame down into different archetypes, and these archetypes have different narratives and they show up differently. And that really helped me. And it really also helped me understand how my wounding was created so that I would know what to do when those wounds were triggered. And prior to that, I had heard about, I was familiar with like self regulation and all of those things, but I had no idea what was being triggered when I was triggered or how to manage emotions or anything else. And that book single handedly changed everything for me.
Thank you so much for that recommended book, Miss Melissa. And I hope our listeners or viewers will read it, and for sure they will be empowered. So, does over labeling inadvertently teach children to frame every hurt as intentional victimization?
I'm sorry, what?
Does over labeling inadvertently teach children to frame every hurt as intentional victimization?
If I were to summarize it, yes, I would say so, because it's what we're doing with the label, right? So what I know after all of the work that I've done on myself is that I very much victimized myself in a lot of ways. So much of the interpersonal conflict that's happening in schools really is just our inner dynamics and learning how to get through conflict. Like it is a difference of opinion. It is my friend's mad at me today and won't let me play with them. It's these little teaching moments that could be very big and very impactful if we took the opportunity to explain what was actually happening. And that's why I think bullying has to stay in its own category, very well defined. I would, for lack of a better word, I would say sacred, because it is its own thing where we have to teach children how to overcome conflict. And the number one way for any of us to overcome conflict is to understand that nothing that happens external of us changes our worth or value as a human. We have to learn not to take so many things personally. Does that mean I don't get hurt all the time? No. I mean, you take the impact of a dynamic and you let yourself feel it. But we teach kids how to experience the feelings instead of becoming angry and just name calling somebody else a bully. We teach children how to identify what their own wounding is. We're removing possibilities for all of those things when we're so quick to label something bullying.
Definitely. And Miss Melissa, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, as well as my movie 101 review and music 101, and my baby podcast Law 101 and mental health 101. Love letters in third season and Science 101 and Sex 101. in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Miss Melissa, what's one actionable step educators or parents can take tomorrow to foster a more nuanced, effective approach about bullying?
Ooh, that's a good question. One actionable step. I think asking the child to explain more about why it felt like bullying so that you can then help them unravel each little piece of it. But I think more than that, just listening. I think just listen. I think a lot of the kids are, it's kind of like someone I know one time compared their breakup to the pain of losing a child. I'm a mom, so that was really triggering for me. But a second after I calmed down, I realized that they put it that way because they wanted me to understand how bad they hurt. And I think a lot of the reason that kids call these incidences bullying when they aren't technically is they're trying to get us to understand their level of pain, and that is valid. It maybe isn't bullying, but their level of pain is valid. And so I think just listening and validating that, like, yeah, that's probably not bullying, but I really hear that you felt betrayed or you felt excluded. And just being really willing to listen. But I think more than that, I think as adults, we have to be the ones to learn the most about ourselves and for ourselves. The more you love yourself, the more you understand yourself, the more compassion that you offer to yourself are all things that you can offer so much more freely to others.
Definitely. And Miss Malisa Hepner, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom people. Oh, so can you please invite our listeners to support your podcast, your books, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I have Emotionally Unavailable on whatever platform that you listen to podcasts. I'm pretty active on Instagram. My website is empoweredwithmelissahepner.org. So all my books can be found on Amazon.
Yes, people, I support Miss Malisa Hepner because if you support her, you support her, I should say, for sure there will be more and more empowering episodes of the podcast itself. More and more empowering books to come, for sure. Miss Melissa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon.